Part 1, The Ace in the Hole. The air in the back room of the butcher shop in Queens was thick with cigar smoke, stale whiskey, and the metallic tang of fear. It was a room with no windows, just a single bare light bulb hanging over a worn green felt table. Around the table sat 5 men, their faces hardened by a life of easy money and casual violence. This was Damon Stone's office, and his 16-year-old daughter, Cassia, was his most important piece of equipment. 5 blocks away, Cassie sat in the passenger seat of a beat-up windowless van, the hub of their operation. The van was filled with humming electronic monitors, showing her a live, multi-angle feed from the tiny cameras hidden in the poker room. A pair of high-quality headphones pressed against her ears, carrying the sound from the hidden microphones. And in front of her was a small, almost invisible lapel mic. The man in the tracksuit, Mr. Gallo. He just glanced at his chip stack. Cassie's voice was a low, steady whisper, a stream of pure data flowing into the tiny, custom-molded earpiece her father wore. That's his tell. He does it when he's holding a premium pair. He's got pocket kings or aces. In the smoke-filled room, Damon Stone, a man whose charm was as dangerous as his addiction, heard his daughter's voice like a message from God. He looked at his own cards, a pair of queens he had been about to raise. Instead he folded, tossing his cards into the muck with a theatrical sigh of frustration. Mr. Gallo went on to win the small pot, his pocket aces holding up. No one was the wiser. This was their system, a grim 2-person symphony of deception. Cassie was the brain, the analyst, the human supercomputer. She didn't just see cards. She saw patterns. She calculated pot odds in a heartbeat. And most importantly, she read people. She saw the subtle flutter of an eyelid, the almost invisible tremor in a hand reaching for chips, the slight shift in posture that screamed, "Bluff!" louder than any words. She translated this raw human data into cold, hard strategy. Damon was the face. He was the actor, the one who executed the play she called. His natural table presence the perfect camouflage for the cold, calculated genius being fed into his ear. The final hand of the night was the biggest. The pot had been bloated with raises and re-races. It was down to 2 players, Damon and Mr. Gallo, the man with the tracksuit and the dangerous reputation. The pot was heavy with cash, enough to change their lives. "He's doing it again," Cassie whispered, watching Gallo on the monitor. "He's staring at the center of the table. He did that an hour ago on the big bluff that failed. He's got nothing. He missed his draw. He's trying to buy the pot." Damon looked at his own cards. A mediocre pair. But he trusted his daughter's read more than he trusted his own eyes. "I'm all in," Damon announced, his voice steady as he pushed his entire stack of chips into the center of the table. Gallo's face twitched. He postured. He rechecked his cards. He tried to stare Damon down. But after a long, tense minute, he threw his cards away in disgust. Damon raked in the massive pot, the other players shaking their heads in a mixture of awe and disbelief at his nerve. The ride home in the van was electric. Damon was euphoric, giddy with the win. The bag on the floor between them was stuffed with cash. "Did you see his face, Cassie? He almost turned green." Damon laughed, pulling her into a fierce hug. "We did it, kid. We're an unbeatable team." He looked at her, his eyes shining with a sincerity she so desperately wanted to believe. "All of this," he said, patting the bag of money. "Every single dollar. It's for you. It's a nest egg for your future. I'm building you a fortress of cash so you never have to live a life like this, so you can go to any college you want, do anything you want. I promise." Cassie looked at the stacks of worn bills, then at her father's smiling face. She was a child, trapped in a dangerous criminal world, and his promise was the only thing that made it bearable. It was the story she told herself every night to justify the fear, the lies, the exhaustion. It was for her future. She chose to believe him. It was the worst bet she ever made. Part 2. The losing hand, the massive win, did not build a fortress, as Damon had promised. It only bought him a ticket to a bigger, more dangerous war. The score didn't satisfy his addiction. It inflamed it. He saw himself as invincible, a poker god, forgetting that the real god was the quiet girl whispering strategy into his ear. He started seeking out bigger games, more dangerous opponents, chasing the dragon of an even bigger high. He found it a month later. It was a game held in the penthouse suite of a downtown hotel, run by a syndicate of players from out of town. These were not local tough guys like Mr. Gallo. These were sharks, men who moved with a cold, quiet professionalism that made Cassie's blood run cold just watching them on the monitor. The buy-in alone was more money than Damon had ever seen before. He put their entire nest egg on the table. From the start, the game felt wrong. Cassie, watching from the van parked 2 blocks away, felt a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. These men had no obvious tells. They were disciplined, their movements economical, their faces unreadable masks. "Dad, this is a bad table," she whispered into the mic, her voice tense. "Their betting patterns are too precise. They're playing game theory, not just cards. We're outmatched. We should walk away now. Cut our losses." "Relax, kid." Damon's voice crackled back in her ear, full of a new, arrogant confidence. "I've got this. I can feel it. Tonight's my night." He was losing, steadily, for hours. He was playing recklessly, trying to force wins with bluffs that the professional players saw through with ease. He was bleeding money, and his frustration was making him sloppy. "Dad, get out now!" Cassie pleaded, her voice rising in panic. "The man with the ring, Silas, he's been baiting you for an hour. He's setting you up for a big pot. Please, just stand up and walk away." Then came the hand. A dream hand for a player like Damon. He was dealt pocket kings. The flop came king high. He had 3 of a kind, a monster hand. He started raising, and Silas, the quiet man with the ring, kept calling him, his face impassive. "He's on a draw, Dad. A flush draw or a straight draw?" Cassie analyzed frantically. "The odds are against him, hitting it on the river. But the pot is getting too big. A small bet here is fine, but don't commit everything." The river card was dealt. It didn't complete the flush or the straight. Damon's 3 kings were almost certainly the winning hand. Silas made a small tentative bet. "He's weak. He missed his draw," Damon said into his mic, his voice triumphant. "I've got him. I'm putting him all in." "No!" Cassie screamed into the mic, a pure, desperate command. "Don't! It's a trap! His tell, he's breathing too calmly. It's a fake tell. He wants you to go all in. He has you beat." But Damon wasn't listening to her anymore. He was listening to the roar of his own ego, the siren song of addiction. He saw his chance to win back everything he'd lost, and more in one glorious moment. "I'm all in," he announced, pushing the last of their fortune, Cassie's entire future, into the middle of the table. Silas looked at him for a long moment, then slowly, almost sadly, pushed his own stack of chips forward to call. He turned over his cards. He had flopped a set of aces. He had had Damon crushed from the very beginning. The room was silent. Damon stared at the cards, his face turning a sickly ashen grey. He had not only lost the pot, he had lost everything. The nest egg, the fortress, the future, all of it gone in a single catastrophic moment of hubris. In the van 2 blocks away, Cassie watched her father's world collapse on the monitor. She ripped the headphones from her ears, the silence in the van suddenly more deafening than any scream. Her future had just been gambled away, and the devil had won. Part 3, The Devil's Deal. The aftermath of the loss was a terrifying, suffocating silence. Damon stumbled out of the hotel and back to the van, a ghost of the confident man who had walked in hours before. He didn't speak. He just drove, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. The fear coming off him was a palpable thing. Silas was not Mr. Gallo. He was not a man who accepted IOUs. The call came the next morning. It was Silas. His voice on the speakerphone was calm, almost gentle, which made it infinitely more menacing. He wasn't angry. He just wanted what he was owed. He gave Damon 24 hours. Damon fell apart. He paced their small apartment, a caged animal, muttering about leaving town, about hiding. But they both knew there was nowhere to hide from a man like Silas. "What are we going to do?" Cassie asked, her own fear a cold stone in her stomach. She was a child, trying to be the adult, trying to find a logical solution where none existed. "I'll handle it," Damon said, his eyes wild. "I'll talk to him. I'll figure something out." That night, Damon arranged to meet Silas. He told Cassie to stay in the apartment, to lock the door and not open it for anyone. But Cassie, her trust in her father shattered, knew she couldn't. A deep primal instinct told her she was no longer just a partner in this. She was a commodity. She slipped out of the apartment and followed her father from a safe distance, her heart pounding with a dread she couldn't name. The meeting was in a deserted warehouse down by the docks, a cliché of a location that made it all the more terrifying. Cassie found a hiding spot behind a stack of rotting pallets, close enough to hear their voices echo in the vast, empty space. Damon was pleading, his voice thin and reedy. "Silas, please. I just need more time. I can get the money back. I swear." Silas's laugh was a low, chilling sound. "Time is the one thing you don't have, Damon. The debt is due. Now." "I don't have it!" Damon cried out, his voice breaking. "I have nothing left." "That's a shame," Silas said. "Then I'll just have to take something else." There was a long pause. Cassie held her breath. And then she heard her father speak the words that would change her life forever. "Wait," Damon said, his voice a desperate, wheezing whisper. "I don't have your money, but I have something better. I have an asset, my ace in the hole." Silas was quiet, listening. "My daughter," Damon continued, the words tumbling out of him in a torrent of betrayal. "She's the reason I was winning. She's a prodigy. She can read anyone. She sees their tells before they even know they have them. She's a human lie detector. Let her work for you, Silas. Let her sit at your tables. She'll be your advantage. She'll earn back your money, and then she'll make you millions more. She's better than cash." Cassie pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a sob. The world tilted, the floor of the warehouse seeming to drop away beneath her. Her own father. The man who had promised her a fortress. A future. He was trading her. Selling her. Offering her up to this monster like a piece of equipment. A tool to be used. To settle his own pathetic debt. She didn't stay to hear Silas's answer. She didn't need to. She knew what a man like that would say to an offer so sweet. She backed away from her hiding spot, her movements as silent as a ghost, and slipped out of the warehouse and into the cold, dark night. She ran. She ran without a destination, fueled by a grief and a rage so profound, it felt like it would tear her in two. She was no longer Cassie Stone, the gifted daughter. She was a fugitive, on the run from the monster who had just bought her, and the bigger monster who had just sold her. Part 4. The Queen in Exile. Cassie landed in Macau with a fake ID, $3,000 stitched into the lining of her jacket, and a heart full of ash. The city was a paradox, a neon-drenched fantasy of impossible wealth built on a foundation of quiet desperation. The smoky back rooms of New York felt like a distant, almost quaint memory compared to the high-gloss, high-stakes ruthlessness of the international poker scene here. Her first months were a brutal exercise in survival. She lived in a tiny, windowless room in a run-down apartment block, miles away from the glittering casinos. The loneliness was a physical presence, a constant companion. She was a 17-year-old girl, alone in a foreign city, haunted by the ghost of a father who had sold her to save himself. The fear was always there, but beneath it something new was beginning to form. A hard, cold resolve, as dense and unyielding as a diamond. She couldn't use her old tricks. There was no van, no hidden earpiece, no father to act as her shield. It was just her mind, and the pittance of cash she had left. She spent the first few weeks just watching. She would nurse a single cheap tea for hours in the low-stakes poker rooms, a silent observer in the corner. She wasn't just watching the cards. She was studying the ecosystem. She saw the overconfident tourists, the local grinders, and the quiet circling sharks. She had to learn to play as herself, to control her own tells while still reading others. Her face, once just naturally placid, was now consciously trained into a perfect mask of neutrality. She practiced in front of her small, cracked mirror, schooling her features to show nothing, whether she was looking at a royal flush or a pair of deuces. Her poker face, once a tool for her father, was now her armor. When her money dwindled to its last few $100s, she finally sat down at a table. It was the smallest no-limit hold'em cash game she could find. Her hands trembled as she bought her chips. But the moment the first cards were dealt, a strange calm descended. This she knew. The math, the patterns, the quiet observation. This was her language. She played for 3 days straight, fueled by cheap noodles and an iron will. She played a tight, disciplined game, folding for hours, waiting for the right moment, the right opponent. It came in the form of a local shark, a man named Wei, who had been bullying the table with aggressive bets. He tried to intimidate her, to push her off a big pot with a massive bluff on the river. But Cassie had been watching him for hours. She had seen his tell. A tiny, almost invisible muscle twitch in his jaw when he was completely full of it. It was the same twitch she had seen in 100 other liars, in 100 other rooms. Her father had taught her to see it, but her own courage was what allowed her to act on it. She looked at Wei's bet, at his confident smirk, and she calmly pushed all of her chips into the middle. "All in," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The table went silent. Wei's smirk faltered. He had expected the young, silent girl to fold. After a long, tense standoff, he threw his cards into the muck in disgust. Cassie raked in a pot that was, to her, a fortune. It was more than just money. It was the first victory that was entirely, completely hers. It was proof that the genius had never been in her father's ear. It had always been in her own head. Part 5. Learning the whole game. The win against Wei gave Cassie a lifeline, a small bankroll that she protected with a fierce devotion. But it also taught her a crucial lesson. Winning at the poker table was not enough. Her father had been a winning player for a time. He had won a fortune, and then he had lost it all in a single night because he was a fool. He knew how to win a hand, but he had no idea how to win the larger game of life. Cassie swore she would never make the same mistake. Her focus shifted. She continued to play poker, a few hours each night. A quiet, disciplined grind that slowly grew her bankroll. But her days were now dedicated to a new, more important education. She turned her tiny Macau apartment into a university of one. She used her poker winnings to buy books, dozens of them. She devoured texts on finance, on behavioral psychology, on game theory. She read about portfolio management, asset protection, and offshore banking. She learned the language of the people who didn't just win money, but kept it, grew it, and made it work for them. She filled notebooks with investment strategies and risk assessment formulas. She realized her physical vulnerability was as dangerous as her financial ignorance. She had escaped Silas once by running. She vowed she would never have to run again. She found a small, gritty gym and started training in Wing Chun, a martial art based on economy of motion, structure, and deflecting an opponent's force back at them. The discipline was brutal, but it forged a new kind of confidence in her. Her body, once just a vessel for her mind, became another tool in her arsenal. She was no longer a frightened teenager. She was becoming a weapon. She hired tutors with her growing fortune. Her retired British accountant taught her via Skype the intricacies of shell corporations and international tax law. A linguistics professor taught her Mandarin and Portuguese, the languages of the city she inhabited. She was building a fortress, not of cash, but of knowledge and skill. She learned to separate her money from herself. A portion of her winnings went into a series of diversified, low-risk investments, managed through a newly created, anonymous corporation in a country with strict banking secrecy laws. Another portion was for her bankroll, and a third was for her living expenses. She was compartmentalizing her life with the same ruthless efficiency she used at the poker table. For 3 years, this was her life. A quiet, monastic existence dedicated to self-improvement. She was transforming herself, piece by piece, from a tool that her father had used into a master strategist. The revenge she was slowly, patiently planning was not just about winning a single dramatic pot against her father. It was about orchestrating a complete and total dismantling of his world. And to do that, she needed to be the most formidable player in every game, both on and off the felt. Part 6, The Birth of the Sphinx. After 5 years in exile, a different woman returned to the United States. She arrived in Las Vegas, not as the fugitive Cassie Stone, but as Ms. Anya Sharma, a common name chosen for its anonymity. A woman with a pristine passport, an ironclad credit history, and a multi-million-dollar net worth held in a labyrinth of untouchable offshore accounts. She was 22 years old, but her eyes held the quiet, weary wisdom of someone much older. She was elegant, poised, and radiated an aura of unnerving stillness. She chose her new poker identity with the same care she had chosen her new legal one. She would be the Sphinx, a name that evoked mystery, riddles, and an ancient, inscrutable power. The name was a promise and a warning. She did not make a grand entrance at the World Series of Poker. That would be too loud, too attention-seeking. Her strategy was a quiet infiltration. She started at the $10 or $20 no-limit hold'em tables at the Aria, a game filled with good professional players and wealthy tourists. Her presence was immediately felt. She would sit at a table for an hour before playing a single hand, her face a perfect mask of neutrality, behind a pair of stylish, dark sunglasses. She never spoke. Not to the dealer, not to the other players, not even to the cocktail waitress. She communicated only through precise, economical hand gestures and the quiet, definitive click of her chips. When she did play, her game was terrifyingly perfect. It was a beautiful, brutal fusion of mathematical precision and an almost psychic ability to read her opponents. She would make folds so good, it was as if she'd seen their cards, and she would pull off bluffs with a stillness that was utterly unnerving. She won, consistently, but without any visible joy or excitement. Winning was not the goal. It was simply the outcome of a perfectly executed process. The whisper started almost immediately. The tight-knit world of Las Vegas high-stakes poker was a village, and a new, mysterious player of this caliber was big news. Poker vloggers tried to film her, but she would simply pick up her chips and move to another table the moment she spotted a camera. The pros, the big names who prided themselves on their ability to read anyone, were baffled by her. "It's like playing against a ghost," one famous pro was overheard saying after losing a massive pot to her. "You get nothing. No tells, no table talk, no emotion. It's like she's not even there. She's just the math." Her legend grew. The silent woman who never lost. The Sphinx. She was a riddle, and the high-stakes world loves nothing more than a riddle it can't solve. She was no longer hiding. She was building a reputation, a weapon forged from silence and skill. She was laying the groundwork, patiently waiting for the day when the right invitation would arrive, the one that would finally allow her to come face to face with the ghost she had left behind in New York. The Sphinx had arrived in Vegas, and the game was about to change. Part 7 the whale, Cassie, now operating under the impenetrable fortress of her new identity, didn't just play poker. She studied the ecosystem of Las Vegas. She understood that the city was a web of money, power, and information, and that the most valuable commodity was gossip. She spent her days in the high-limit poker rooms of the Bellagio and the Aria, not just playing, but listening. She was a silent, calculating sponge, absorbing every whisper, every rumor, every story of a big win or a catastrophic loss. And it was during one of these sessions that she first heard his name again. She was in a tough $50 or $100 no-limit game, quietly stacking chips, when two pros at the other end of the table started talking. "Did you hear about the action in the Ivy Room last night?" the first pro asked. Damon Stone was back at it. Lost $500,000 in 2 hours. Cassie's hands, meticulously arranging her chips into neat stacks of 20, did not still. Her expression, hidden behind her dark sunglasses, did not change. But inside, a switch was flipped. "Stone, I'm amazed he can still get a seat at these games," the second pro scoffed. "The guy's a complete whale, an action junkie. He plays like a tourist who just won the lottery. All aggression, no finesse. He's a walk-in ATM for the rest of us. Tell me about it," the first pro said, shaking his head. "But the weird thing is, he never goes broke. He'll lose a fortune one night, and the next day he's back at the cage, buying in for another $250,000 like nothing happened. Someone's bankrolling him. Must be some tech billionaire, or an oil sheik, who just likes the action. A whale. A rich amateur who consistently loses money, propped up by a mysterious backer. That's what her father had become. The man who once saw himself as a master of the game was now just entertainment for the real sharks, his losses fueling their profits. He hadn't recovered from his addiction. He had just found a bigger enabler. The knowledge didn't bring Cassie any satisfaction. It filled her with a cold, clear sense of purpose. Her father wasn't just a ghost from her past anymore. He was a target, a puzzle to be solved. Who was this mysterious benefactor? Why would anyone pour millions of dollars into a known losing player? Her revenge, she realized, couldn't just be about taking her father's money. He didn't really have any. His money was an illusion, a leash held by someone else. To truly achieve her goal, she had to get into his game. She had to identify the puppet master. And to do that, she had to become so good, so notorious, that she couldn't be ignored. She had to get an invitation to the tables where the real whales played. Part 8, the invitation to the Triton game. Cassie's ascent through the ranks of Las Vegas poker was methodical and terrifying. Operating as the Sphinx, she became a creature of pure legend. She systematically moved up in stakes, from the mid-level games to the high-stakes cash games in the private salons and exclusive villas of the MGM Grand and the Wynn. Her bankroll grew, but more importantly, her reputation solidified. Her legend was built on a foundation of silence and a few spectacular, unforgettable hands that were dissected and debated for weeks in the poker community. One such hand took place in a private game in a Caesar's Palace villa. Cassie was heads up against a famously aggressive, world-renowned pro named Miami Rick. The pot was enormous, over $1 million. On the river, Rick, after much deliberation, moved all in, putting Cassie to a decision for her entire stack. It was a move designed to intimidate, to represent a hand that could not be beaten. The room was silent. Cassie sat perfectly still for 3 full minutes, her face an unreadable mask. She didn't move a muscle. Then, with a quiet, economical gesture, she pushed her chips forward to call. Rick, confident in his bluff, smirked and turned over his cards. Nothing but a busted draw. Cassie quietly turned over hers. A single, mediocre pair. An impossibly heroic call. She had read him perfectly, sniffed out his bluff, with nothing but a middle pair and nerves of ice. Rick was so stunned, he simply stood up and walked away from the table without a word. The story of the Sphinx's call became the talk of Vegas. She wasn't just a good player. She was a phenomenon. She was a riddle that no one could solve. And that was exactly what she needed to attract the attention of Alistair Finch. Finch was a semi-retired, old-school casino mogul, a man who had built half the city, and now, in his old age, found his greatest pleasure in hosting the most exclusive, highest-stakes private poker game in the world, the Triton game. The game was invitation only, a mix of the world's best pros, the richest amateur whales, and a few wild cards Finch invited simply for the entertainment. It was the one game where she knew her father, the ultimate whale, would be a regular. 2 weeks after the hand against Miami Rick, a sleek black envelope was delivered by courier to her hotel suite. It was heavy, made of thick cardstock. There was no return address. Inside was a single, elegant card. Embossed in gold on the front was a trident. On the back, handwritten in beautiful calligraphy, were only a date, a time, and the number of a private suite at the new Kronos Tower. Cassie held the invitation in her hand. It was the key to the final act, the ticket to the arena where she would finally confront the ghosts of her past. Her expression, as always, was a perfect mask of calm neutrality. But inside, the girl who had fled into the night 5 years ago knew that her long game was finally approaching its endgame. The Queen was about to return to the board. Part 9. Sitting with Ghosts. The Triton game was not held in a casino. It was held in a private residential suite at the top of the Kronos Tower, a sprawling penthouse that Alistair Finch kept exclusively for this purpose. The room was the height of opulent, masculine luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking 180-degree view of the glittering Las Vegas Strip. A private bar was stocked with impossible-to-find single malt scotches. The air was clean, filtered, and filled with the low murmur of powerful men's voices. The custom-made poker table was the altar at the center of this cathedral of wealth. The chips were not plastic. They were heavy ceramic discs that clicked together with a satisfying, deep clack. Cassie, dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored black silk blouse and trousers, was the last to arrive. Her Sphinx persona was in full effect. She nodded once to the room, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement, and took her designated seat. The other players, a tech billionaire, a hedge fund manager, a famous poker pro, and a few others, greeted her with a mixture of apprehension and respect. She took her seat and her eyes scanned the table. And there he was, directly across from her. Her father. Damon Stone looked older. The years of losing, of stress, of living a lie had taken their toll. His once charismatic smile was now a tight, nervous grimace. His eyes, which she remembered as being full of reckless charm, were now haunted and desperate. He looked at her, at the Sphinx, with the same nervous awe as everyone else. There was not a flicker of recognition in his eyes. To him, she was just the dangerous new player everyone was whispering about. Cassie's own face remained a perfect, unreadable mask. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but her hands, as she calmly stacked her buy-in chips, were perfectly steady. Then, another man took the seat to her father's right. He was older now, too, his hair silver at the temples, but his eyes were the same. The same cold, dead, predatory eyes she had seen in the darkness of a warehouse 5 years ago. It was Silas, the loan shark, the man her father had sold her to. Silas leaned over to Damon and slid a rack of purple, high-value chips toward him. "Don't play scared tonight, Damon," Silas murmured, his voice a low purr of control. "Have fun. I've got you covered." Damon gave a grateful, almost subservient nod. In that moment, the entire, sick truth of the past 5 years crashed down on Cassie. Her father had not escaped. He had simply traded one master for another. Silas, the man who had taken their money, was now his benefactor, his keeper. He was propping Damon up, keeping him in the game, owning him completely. Her father was not a player. He was a puppet, his strings held by the very man who had precipitated his downfall. It was the ultimate test of her poker face. A storm of rage, grief, and a cold, terrible clarity raged inside her. But on the outside, she was stillness itself. She finished arranging her chips into neat, perfect stacks. She did not flinch. She did not even blink. The dealer, a professional hired for the game, finished the shuffle. "Cards in the air," he announced. "Shuffle up and deal." The first card slid across the green felt. The real game had just begun. Cassie looked across the table at the two men who had ruined her life. One the architect of her pain, the other its beneficiary. And she was ready to burn their entire world to the ground. But then, the twist. Setting the cooler, the Triton game began, and a quiet, intense energy settled over the table. The sound of heavy ceramic chips clicking together was the only real conversation. For the first 2 hours, Cassie played with the patience of a predator stalking its prey. She was a statue, her face a mask, her movements economical. She folded most of her hands, watching, learning, and mapping the dynamics of the table. She was not just playing her own cards. She was subtly playing the entire table. She let the tech billionaire win a small pot against her with a weak hand, making him feel overconfident and more likely to call big bets later. She executed a single brilliant bluff against the professional player, a move that was both profitable and served as a warning, making him hesitant to challenge her later. Her primary focus, however, was her father. She needed to nurture his arrogance, to fatten him up for the kill. Early in the night, Damon was dealt a good hand and made a large, aggressive bet. Cassie, holding a hand she knew was slightly better, made a great show of agonizing over the decision before folding. Damon raked in the pot, a smug, triumphant look on his face. He thought he had outplayed the Sphinx. Cassie had just fed his ego, a crucial investment in her long-term plan. Silas, sitting next to Damon, acted as his personal bank and coach, whispering encouragement. "See? She's just a kid. All hype. You're the real player here, Damon." Damon, desperate for validation, soaked it all in. As the hours wore on, Cassie meticulously began to orchestrate the table. She would raise to isolate weaker players, protecting her father from being bled dry by the other sharks. She would fold to let him win small, uncontested pots. To the others, she was just a disciplined, unpredictable player. But in reality, she was the puppet master, manipulating the chip stacks and the table dynamics, preparing the stage for the final act. She was setting up a cooler, a classic brutal poker scenario where a player with an exceptionally strong hand loses to an even stronger, near unbeatable hand. It was a situation so unlucky, so improbable, that the loser could never be blamed for playing it badly. It was a hand designed to take every last chip, but Cassie wasn't leaving it to chance. She was using her mastery of probability and psychology to steer the game toward this exact conclusion. She observed the dealer's shuffling patterns. She tracked the cards that had been played. She manipulated the betting to keep specific players in or out of hands, subtly influencing the odds of which cards would appear on the flop. It was an act of breathtaking mental gymnastics, a high-wire act of probability and control. As the night wore on, and the stakes grew higher, the other, more cautious players began to cash out, unwilling to risk their fortunes against the escalating aggression of Damon, fueled by Silas's money, and the unnerving precision of the Sphinx. Finally, it was down to just a few of them. The table was set. The deck was hot. The air was thick with the promise of a final, catastrophic collision. Cassie gathered her chips, her face a perfect mask of calm. The trap was now ready to be sprung. Parte de all-in, the hand that would define the rest of their lives, began innocently enough. The dealer, with a practiced flourish, sent the card sliding across the green felt. Cassie peeked at her 2 cards. The 8 and 9 of spades, a decent speculative hand with the potential for a straight or a flush. Across the table, Damon looked at his own cards and a jolt of pure adrenaline shot through him. 2 aces, the best starting hand in Hold'em. The betting before the flop was aggressive. Damon raised, and Cassie, seeing her chance to build the pot, simply called. The other remaining players folded. It was heads up. Her versus her father. The dealer burned a card and laid out the flop. The ace of hearts, the 10 of spades, the jack of spades. It was a dream flop for Damon. He had hit his set of aces, a monster hand that was a massive favorite to win. A triumphant gleam appeared in his eyes. For Cassie, the flop was a miracle of a different kind. It had given her a flush draw, a straight draw, and if the stars aligned, a straight flush draw. It was a beautiful, dangerous trap. Damon bet big, a confident, powerful bet designed to end the hand right there. Cassie, after a long theatrical pause that she knew he would misinterpret as weakness, just called. She had to keep him in the hand. "She's on a draw," Silas whispered to Damon. "She's chasing. Make her pay." The dealer burned another card and turned over the next card. The 2 of spades. The card hit the table, and the dynamic shifted. The 4th spade on the board completed Cassie's flush. She now had a very strong hand. But she knew Damon, with his set of aces, would be even more confident. He wouldn't believe she had a spade. "Now you finish her," Silas urged. Damon bet again, a much larger amount, a bet designed to look like he was protecting his hand from any possible draws. This was the critical moment. Cassie had to play it perfectly. After another long pause, she didn't just call. She raised, pushing a large stack of chips forward. It was a move of aggression, a move that looked exactly like a semi-bluff, an attempt to scare him off the pot. Damon laughed. "You're not scaring me, sweetheart," he said to the silent Sphinx. He looked at Silas, who gave him an encouraging nod. He thought she was weak, trying to bully him. It was a story he wanted to believe. "I see your raise," Damon said, pushing more chips in, "and I re-raise you." The pot was now astronomically large, containing the full value of a luxury condominium, a fleet of sports cars. It was life-altering money. The dealer burned the final card and placed the river card on the table. It was the 7 of spades. A quiet gasp went around the table. Damon didn't see the danger. All he saw was that the board didn't pair, meaning his set of aces was still a monster. He had the winning hand. Cassie acted first. She calmly pushed a massive stack of chips forward, a bet so large it represented most of her remaining stack. Damon looked at his cards, then at her. He saw her as a bluffer, a young upstart who had gone too far. He saw his chance for a final, glorious victory. "She's got nothing," Silas whispered, his voice greedy. "Take it all. End her." Damon stood up, a dramatic flair for the other players. "I'm not just calling you Sphinx," he declared. "I'm all in." He pushed every last chip he possessed into the center of the table. The room was silent. Everything was on the line. Cassie looked at the mountain of chips, then at her father's triumphant face. Without any hesitation, she quietly pushed her own remaining stack forward. "Call," she said. It was the first word she had spoken all night. Part 12, the Queen of Spades. The moment hung in the air, thick and heavy. The all-in had been called. The time for betting and bluffing was over. All that was left was the truth. "Set of aces," Damon announced proudly, flipping over his 2 aces with a flourish. His voice was full of arrogant certainty. He had played the hand perfectly, he thought. He had trapped the aggressive young player. He glanced at Silas, who gave him a smug, satisfied nod. The dealer reached for the pot, ready to push the mountain of chips toward Damon. "Wait," Cassie said, her voice still quiet, but now carrying an undeniable weight of authority. She slowly reached for her 2 face-down cards. She did not flip them over with a dramatic gesture. She simply turned them over, her movements economical and precise, and placed them next to the 5 community cards on the table. The 8 of spades and the 9 of spades. The dealer stared at the board, his professional composure momentarily breaking. He looked at the 5 community cards. The ace of hearts, the 10 of spades, the jack of spades, the 2 of spades, and the 7 of spades. He then looked at Cassie's hand. "Straight flush," the dealer announced, his voice filled with a stunned respect. 7 to jack of spades. The straight flush wins. A collective, audible gasp went through the room. Damon's triumphant expression froze, then collapsed as his brain processed the impossible reality. 3 aces was a monster. A straight flush was a ghost. A hand so rare most players go their entire lives without seeing one. He had been on the receiving end of the coldest, most brutal cooler imaginable. He sank back into his chair, his face the color of ash. Cassie said nothing. She simply watched as the dealer began the long, laborious process of pushing the mountain of chips. His home, his cars, his borrowed fortune, his entire life, across the table to her side. Silas, his face dark with fury, stood up and took a menacing step toward Damon. "You fool! You lost it all!" But Cassie spoke again, her voice cutting through the tension like a shard of ice. She looked directly at Silas, her sunglasses now off, her eyes meeting his for the first time. "The debt is paid," she said. Silas froze, staring at her, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "His debt to you," Cassie clarified, her voice unwavering. "You backed him for tonight's game. My winnings have more than covered what he owed you. Your arrangement is over. You will not contact him or me ever again." Her authority was absolute. Her tone was not one of negotiation. It was a statement of fact. Silas looked at her, at the young woman who now controlled a fortune, at the cold, hard intelligence in her eyes. He saw the same fire he had seen 5 years ago, now forged into something unbreakable. He gave a single, curt nod, turned, and walked out of the room without another word. Damon, a broken man, looked up at her, his eyes full of bewilderment. He still didn't understand. Who are you?" he croaked, his voice raspy. Cassie finished stacking the last of her chips. She stood up from the table, her long game finally over. She paused at the door and looked back at the shell of the man who had been her father. She didn't say her name. She didn't have to. She just looked at him, and in her steady, unforgiving gaze, he finally saw it. He saw the ghost of the 16-year-old girl in the van. He saw the daughter he had sold, and the full weight of his betrayal, delivered back to him in a single perfect hand, finally crashed down upon him. Cassie walked out of the penthouse suite and into the cool Las Vegas night, leaving him alone in the ruins of his life. She did not feel the euphoria of a winner. She felt a quiet, profound, and final sense of peace. The ledger was balanced. The debt was paid. The Queen had taken the board.